Hello, Pelle here with another video for you. Today I'm going to talk about parameter mapping, and I have made this demo patch for you that you can find if you go to the Quick Hub, Demos, Building, and then Parameter Mapping. So let's load the patch. And here we are. And let's start over here. So what is parameter mapping? So parameter mapping means how do we go from the values outputted by our interface to the values that we want in the input of whatever we're controlling. For example, we might want to control the frequency of an oscillator, and we want to control it using a slider. The problem is that the slider goes from 0 and to 1, but the oscillator wants an input that is a frequency value, so something like 220 or 440. So how do we go from the 0 to 1 range to the frequency range? One simple way of doing this is to simply multiply the value of the slider by whatever we want our max value to be. For example, we can multiply it by 440. And doing that, the slider will now go from 0 to 440. So if we plug this into the oscillator, get some sound, we have a nice range on the slider. But let's say we don't want the slider to go all the way to 0, but we still want it to end at 440 Hertz, for example. How could we do that? The easiest way to do just that is to use the map block. And what this block does is that it takes a value that is in one range, and the range you can specify with these controls here, the minimum and maximum of the range. So for our slider, it's 0 to 1. And the map block will take that range and then convert it to a different range. For example, 220 to 880, which is a very nice range for frequency. So let's try that. So that will give us a slider. In this case, it will give us a slider that covers 2 octaves pretty good. But there is one problem with this mapping. If I'm going to play this slider, I probably want it to be ranged kind of like the keys on a piano. So if this slider is 2 octaves, I would expect the middle to be the first octave. Problem is that with this linear slider, that is not the case. Actually, the octave is around like here. So that is not the middle of the slider. So how can we fix this? We can fix that using the MIDI to frequency, block that we have seen before, and that makes it much easier to deal with like frequencies and musical notes. So as you probably know already, the MIDI to frec block will take a MIDI note number between 0 and 127 and convert it to a frequency. So if we take our slider from 0 to 1 and then convert it to a range that is between 100 and 0 and 127, like for example 57 to 81, that will give us a very nice playable frequency range where the octave is in the middle of the slider. Alright, so now the slider is linear with respect to pitch, but if we want to play our slider, maybe we think it's a bit too difficult. if it's just continuous like this. So if we want to actually have discrete nodes on our slider, we can use a round block. And the round block, it fits together very well with the midi to fric block, because we can just take our midi node value, round it off, and we will get only only whole nodes. So let's hear how that sounds. And we have made our slider have discrete steps for each node in our 2-octave range. Pretty good. And you can of course use the round block for other stuff than just nodes. So what you would do in that case, let me just show you quickly, is that all right, I'm going off the rails here. Let's say you want to what you do is that you could multiply slider by something, round it off, and then put it back into a normalized range, kind of like that, and that will give you a very nice. That will give you. I don't know if you can hear this. Let's go just maybe 3 steps, no 4, and then this will be 0.25. Yeah. We will have a stepped slider. Okay, sorry for going rogue on you like that. Let's move on to the next step. So let's say you have built your little music machine and you want it to be controlled by something else in your patch. But you want to make sure that the values you're receiving is within a certain range, because your machine might not work with the values outside of that range. To achieve that, we use the clamp block. And what the clamp block does is that it takes a value and it makes sure that the value is within a range that you set using these 2 inputs here. So if the value coming in is less than the input, it will just output this minimum value. And if the value coming in is greater than the max here, it will just output the max. So in this case, I have used that to make it so only a little section of the slider is actually doing anything. So in this part of the slider, we are below the minimum, so we don't hear any change. And if I go up, oh, here, now I'm within the range. So here I can play the notes. And here, up here, I'm above the maximum, so nothing happens. So you can use that to make sure that your parameters always stay within a certain range. And this is especially useful if you have inputs that are not allowed to go, for example, below 0 or above 1. Use a clamp. All right, just a couple of steps left now. So have a bit of a different music machine here. We have a noise block going into a filter and then going to the output. And let's say that we want to control this filter with the slider. So a simple way of doing this would be to map the slider range from 0 to 1 to our desired filter range, which could be something like 20 to 20,000 hertz. So let's hear how that sounds. And I have this other slider here just to visualize what is going to happen in a little bit. So just let's focus on this one. So here down here, the filter sounds pretty good, but as soon as I get to this end of the filter, I can't really hear the difference anymore. So how do we deal with that? What we have to do is to make the slider non-linear. And one way of doing that is with the power block. And the power block will just take an input, and the value of the input will be raised to whatever power you specify here. And actually, I have a that will show how this works. So here is just a normal slider, and it is linear. But if we take the slider value and then put it to the second power, you see we get this curve instead. And what this will do is that it will add more detail in like this part of the slider. I will show you in a moment in virtual reality. If we put the value, the exponent, above 1, then we get a curve like this. If it's between 0 and 1, it will look kind of the opposite, like this. So let's see how that looks when we apply it to the slider. So now I take the slider value and I put it to the second power. And now you can see in this output slider kind of how this mapping works. So if I move it here, you see in this part of the slider, the output moves very slowly. So I actually have kind of more detail in this low end, just like I wanted. So now I can control the frequency of the filter better in this more interesting region of the frequency range. And if I put the slider all the way up, it is always going to also end up at 1 over here. And if I put the value to like 0.5, like you saw on the graph before, we get kind of the opposite mapping, where we have more detail up here and less detail down here. So this is a very powerful way to map values each time you want something to be non-linear. All right, let's look at the last point of this tutorial. So yeah, let's say again that you have built your little music machine and you're getting control values from somewhere else in your patch. But you're getting the control values through a jolt wire that you have plugged into your machine. For example, here I'm controlling the amplitude of this oscillator. Let's hear how that sounds when the amplitude is being controlled by a jolt wire. So let's see if you can hear this. I'm not sure if you noticed, but there are this kind of clicky sound. We are getting a bit of artifacts. Just listen again. All right, so we're getting like a bit of a clicky sound, and in general, yeah, this is a method so that you can avoid clicks in your patch whenever you want to control stuff. The way we remove those clicks is to smooth the value, and the best way to do that, in my opinion, is with the integrator. So let's hear how it sounds when I plug in the integrator. No more clicks. Great. So let's see if we can visualize what is actually going on here. So I'm going to plug my slider into the integrator and then let the integrator control this other slider. So see what happens with the output value when I move the slider. So see, it's kind of lagging behind, or it has become smoothed. These two controls on the integrator control how fast the value kind of settles in when the value is rising, and this other parameter controls how fast the value settles when we're going down. So for example, if I put the rise time to 0, it will go up straight away when I move the slider, but it will be smooth on the way down. If I put it like to 1 second, it will be very slow. So you can use this to kind of lerp or smooth between values. Great. Let's just look at I'm going to go off road again and make make a more dramatic example. Let's get a couple of buttons. Yeah. Set one button to 1 and the other one is 0. So now I can go like this. Set the amplitude to 0. I can turn the sound on and off. But I'm getting a little bit of a click, or the change is very dramatic. But if I plug in the integrator and I do the same thing. Oh, I need to turn on the sound. Do the same thing. We get a smooth transition. All right. So that was just a few tricks. There are many more, of course, but that's a few ways that you can deal with the parameters and mapping. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.